They say the moon goddess gifts every wolf a soulmate, a destiny bound by scent and instinct, sealed under the harvest moon. This was the one truth Alora, daughter of the Meadow Pack, had clung to since her first shift. She was 25, past the prime mating age, and tonight, at the annual bonding rite, she would discover that destiny was a myth designed to comfort the fortunate. The ceremonial glade was a spectacle of cruel, dazzling perfection. Torches blazed atop towering pines, bathing the gathered wolves in a merciless golden light. The air, thick with the scent of celebratory spiced honey and the raw electric musk of new mate bonds, felt like a physical weight crushing Alora's lungs. Every ripple of laughter that bounced across the clearing was not joy. It was a hammer blow echoing the single, unforgivable truth of her existence. Alora sought refuge exactly where she belonged, on the extreme fringe of the celebration. She stood behind the massive, gnarled roots of the elder oak, where the shadows were deepest and the torchlight only reached in mocking, fleeting streaks. Her simple, home-dyed woolen dress felt like a coarse prison against her skin, starkly contrasting the shimmering silks and furs worn by the favored daughters of the pack. She kept her head bowed, her focus anchored to the ground, specifically to the patch of damp, cold earth and exposed roots beneath her worn leather boots. The whispered knife began its work immediately. A group of younger betas, radiant and flushed with wine and the promise of acclaim, gathered mere feet away, oblivious to the unmarked echo in the shadows. "Did you see the silks Lyra is wearing?" A voice, sharp and high, sliced through the general din. "Alpha Kalen can't take his eyes off her. A perfect pairing. Power and breeding." "They say Alora is here again," another whispered, the name a casual, dismissive insult. "Still hoping for a charity claim? It's pathetic. She's been marked by the echo. No mate bond, no power, nothing but a pretty face that fades." "The echo," the first girl repeated with a laugh, "is nature's way of ensuring the weak bloodline ends here. She can't even hold a proper shift, can she?" The words landed on Alora's shame like hot coals. Her shift was weak, a small, hesitant gray wolf, incapable of keeping up with the pack's powerful hunting runs. Her omega status was a burden. Her unmated status was a stain. The desperate, silent longing to belong, to feel the safety of a mate bond, any mate bond, twisted in her gut. She was worthless. She was a biological mistake. Hours crawled by. The celebration intensified. The scent of new mate claims, the sweet, sharp tang of destiny fulfilled, began to bloom across the glade. Each scent was a fresh wave of humiliation, reminding Alora that she was the one empty vessel in a sea of full promises. She didn't cry. Crying was a luxury afforded to wolves whose grief was acknowledged. Her grief was merely an inconvenience to the pack's perfect night. The instant subversion. The ceremony reached its peak. Alpha Kalen, the pack's young, dominant leader, stood on the central stone altar, radiating a terrifying golden power. He claimed Lyra, sealing their union with a roar that was part thunder, part promise. The entire glade erupted in a joyous cacophony. Alora, bracing herself for the final wave of rejection, felt the familiar, cold numbness in her chest. She took a shuddering breath, ready to slip away unnoticed into the long night of her continued solitude. But as she turned, a shadow fell over her. It wasn't one of the pack members. It was a giant. He was the size of a beta, but carried the weight of an alpha. His scent was not the familiar pine and moss of the Meadow Pack, but dry cedar and distant steel, a scent that spoke of mountains and solitude. He was Orion, the brutal, landless alpha from the northern clans, known for his cold efficiency and lack of mercy. His presence here was unprecedented. He was enemy territory, tolerated only because his ferocity was useful. He didn't look at her face. He looked down at the pale skin just above her worn collarbone, the echo mark, the blank spot where her mate bond should have been. His voice, when it came, was a low rumble that cut through the celebratory roar around them, violating the sanctity of the rite. "You are the unchosen one, the echo," he stated, his dark eyes like chips of flint. Alora couldn't speak. She could only stare up at him, anticipating the final, deserved insult. Instead, Orion did the unthinkable. He reached out and gently, deliberately, took her hand, his fingers immense and rough around her own. He pulled her forward, out of the comforting shadow of the elder oak, into the merciless golden light of the altar. "I, Alpha Orion of the Northern Peaks, claim this echo," he announced, his voice carrying not authority, but raw, non-negotiable finality. The entire glade fell instantly silent. The laughter died, the music stopped. All eyes were on the giant Alpha and the small, trembling Omega. The transactional hook. Before Alora could process the shock, Orion leaned down, his voice now a low, private growl, his breath smelling of the cold northern air. It was the instant demand, the action that would define her life. "You will pack nothing but essentials," he commanded, his eyes still fixed on the horrified faces of the pack elders, not her. "We leave in 10 minutes. I need a consort immediately for a political arrangement. You need a pack to keep you alive. You will be my claim, and I will be your shield. Do you accept this truth?" It wasn't romantic. It was transactional, cold, and utterly terrifying. Yet beneath the fear, Alora felt a surge of defiant, desperate hope. She wouldn't be rejected. She would be used. Alora looked past Orion's shoulder to the altar, where Kaiser Thorn and his Luna Lyra stood in silent, furious shock. She looked at the faces of the betas who had just called her worthless. With a strength she didn't know she possessed, Alora looked up at the giant Alpha, the one who saw her not as a destiny, but as a utility. "Yes," she whispered, the single word sealing a fate more perilous, yet more purposeful than the empty existence she had just accepted. Before we continue, let us know where you're watching from. Chapter 2. The Weight of Cedar and Steel. The interruption phase. Sensory overload. Alora's yes was a thread snapped in the overwhelming silence. The silence didn't last. It was torn apart by a sudden collective snarl from the meadow pack. Their alpha, Kalen, recovered from his shock and vaulted down from the altar, his golden eyes burning with territorial fury. "You dare, Orion? On our sacred ground? She is unmarked garbage, a genetic dead end. Take your insult and leave." Orion didn't move. He stood over Alora, a vast, unyielding wall of pure, raw male power. His scent, dry cedar, cold steel, and the acrid tang of absolute domination, was a physical force, pressing the air out of Alora's lungs. It was an assault on her senses, a complete, overwhelming contrast to the sweet, soft scents of her home pack. Alora stared at the scarred leather of his belt, unable to lift her eyes higher. Every line of his body, the sheer width of his shoulders, the thick, corded muscle of his neck, the way his heavy black travel cloak settled, spoke of violence endured and violence delivered. He was not merely large, he was architecturally dangerous. The silence stretched again, vibrating with alpha tension. The roar of the distant falls suddenly sounded like a pulse drum, fast, urgent, and terrified. "She is claimed," Orion stated simply, his voice a low frequency that resonated through the damp moss beneath Alora's feet. "Your traditions are honored. Now step back." Kalen roared, shifting instantly. His meadowpack wolf was large, golden, and imposing. But against Orion's stillness, Kalen looked like a startled fawn. Orion released Alora's hand. The sudden absence of his rough warmth was almost as jarring as his presence. He shifted, and the ground trembled. His transformation was not fluid but violent, a cascade of snapping bone and tearing fabric. His wolf, Umbra, was a monstrosity. It wasn't the pure black of a shadow wolf, but a mottled, scarred iron gray, built low to the ground, with shoulders like granite slabs and eyes that glowed with a terrifying ancient predatory amber. Umbra didn't bark, didn't growl. He simply took one heavy measured step toward Kaelin. That single step carried all the crushing weight of the northern peaks. Kaelin, the beloved Alpha, whimpered. It was a pathetic, involuntary sound of submission. He retreated, his golden wolf cowering beneath the silent, absolute dominance of Orion. The entire Meadowpack line recoiled, their resentment replaced by paralyzing fear. 10 minutes, Omega! Orion's command resonated telepathically in Alora's mind, heavy and intrusive. Your grandmother's cabin. Pack only what fits in your hands. Do not be late. This alliance is not negotiable. The immediate pressure of proximity. Alora fled. The scent of cedar and steel burned into her nostrils. She didn't run to her grandmother's cottage in joy. She ran in a panic that mirrored the pack's. She was claimed, yes, but by a creature of terrifying power who saw her as a disposable tool. In the small, familiar safety of her grandmother's cabin, she snatched only the essentials: a small healer's poultice, a knife, and the worn leather satchel her mother had left her. Every movement was frantic, driven by the iron clock, the 10 minutes Orion had allotted. She burst from the cabin exactly 9 minutes later. Orion was waiting, shifted back to human form, his cloak already draped over a massive northern pack stallion. He took the small satchel from her, a gesture of ownership, not help, and tossed it carelessly into the saddlebag. He didn't offer her a seat on his horse. He lifted her, effortlessly, as if she were a piece of kindling, and placed her in front of him. This proximity was the final, agonizing sensory assault. Alora was pressed against his chest, her head tucked awkwardly beneath his immense jaw. She could feel the hard, unyielding muscle of his abdomen beneath her spine and the constant, deep tremor of restrained alpha power that pulsed through his body. His hands, large and iron-hard, held the reins directly on either side of her hips. "Do not move," he commanded, his breath stirring the fine hairs at the base of her neck. "And do not speak. We travel fast, and we will be pursued." The extended tension of the ride. The ride through the forested border was an endless ordeal. Alora was acutely aware of every single point of contact between them. This wasn't romantic. It was a sensory violation of her personal space, magnified by the difference in their size. The constant, oppressive smell of cedar and cold steel threatened to overwhelm her senses, inducing a strange mix of terror and reluctant security. She focused entirely on the movement. The powerful rhythm of the stallion, the silent, relentless speed, and the occasional subtle shift in Orion's immense frame as he scanned the perimeter. Every time he shifted his weight, Alora was reminded of the enormous, dangerous power that held her captive. They rode for hours, the moon tracking across the sky. Alora's mind began to unravel. The silence was broken only by the sound of the horse and the pounding of her own frantic heart against Orion's chest. She struggled to rationalize the why. Why her? Why the echo? Finally, just as the eastern sky began to bleed into a cold, gray dawn, Orion commanded the horse to stop beneath a jagged, ancient stone overhang. "Dismount," he ordered, his tone flat, exhausted. "We rest here until nightfall." Alora stumbled off the horse, her legs numb, her entire body screaming from the unyielding proximity. She finally turned to face him, the early light illuminating the deep white scar that bisected his lip and cheek, the mark of a battle he clearly won. "Why me?" she finally dared to whisper, the single question holding all the anguish of her cursed life. "Why not a strong alpha female? Why the echo?" Orion did not soften. He stared at her, his amber eyes tired but penetrating. He walked toward her, and Alora automatically took a fearful step back. He followed, closing the space, until his immense presence eclipsed the gray dawn. He stopped inches from her, forcing her to crane her neck back to meet his gaze. He delivered the transactional honesty that would define their bond. "Because I need a political consort who cannot challenge my authority and who has no pack loyalty to interfere with my territorial plans," he said, his voice dropping to a harsh rumble. "And you, little Omega, needed someone to choose you. This is not destiny. This is a mutually beneficial contract. Your price is obedience. My payment is protection. Do not mistake either for affection." He turned and began to set up a crude camp, leaving Alora standing alone, her terror now laced with a cold, terrifying understanding of her new, dangerous worth. Chapter 3. The Unspoken Bond and the Iron Will, the Confined Space. The stone overhang provided meager shelter. Orion, despite his earlier words about the harshness of their arrangement, was ruthlessly efficient. He built a fire, small, smokeless, and expertly contained, and spread a thick layer of pine boughs beneath the rock ledge. He handed Alora a hard biscuit and a canteen of water, his movements precise and entirely impersonal. The atmosphere was a suffocating mix of residual terror from the night's escape and the unbearable proximity of his power. Alora found herself seated barely 6 feet from him. In the small cave of the overhang, it felt like 6 inches. Alora focused on the biscuit, finding its bland texture the only anchor in her churning reality. She needed to break the silence, not with a question about her feelings, but about his agenda. That was the only currency he respected. "The Meadowpack will not let this slight stand," Alora began, her voice brittle but steady. "Alpha Kalen will demand retribution. His claim on Lyra was weakened by your interruption. You've given him a political target." Orion didn't look up from sharpening a long hunting knife. The rasp of the steel was the only immediate reply. When he finally spoke, his voice was low, cutting the air like the very blade he held. "Kalen will demand what his fear allows him to demand, little Omega. I interrupted his right, yes, but I also saved him the political embarrassment of marrying a female who might soon carry the scent of my shadow. He is silent now, because his pack knows the cost of attacking the northern peaks is annihilation. He will send words. I will send silence. The problem ends there." "It does not end there," Alora persisted, ignoring the spike of fear caused by his possessive use of my shadow. "Lyra's family is powerful. They will see my forced claim as an act of war, not a marriage. They will demand to know the true purpose of this contract. What is it, Orion? Why risk a territorial war for convenience?" Orion finally lifted his head, fixing his amber eyes on her. The directness of his gaze was a physical weight. "You are tenacious. I will give you that. Tenacity is useful. My purpose is simple. Political leverage. I need a consort whose existence is legally undeniable but whose loyalty is zero. You fit the profile perfectly. As for the details, they are above your purview." "My life is not above my purview," Alora shot back, the inherited shame momentarily eclipsed by genuine fury. "I was publicly humiliated. I was called a genetic failure. Now I am owned by the most ruthless alpha on the continent. I demand to know the threat that makes my obedience so crucial." Orion dropped the knife point first into the earth beside him, a deliberate, dangerous gesture. "The immediate threat is from within my own council. A faction seeks to usurp my authority before the autumn summit. They require proof that my line is secured. Your presence as a legally claimed consort denies them that opening. You provide political documentation, Omega. Nothing more." Alora leaned forward, her small frame rigid with defiance. "Documentation is useless if the document is fraudulent. Your council will know I carry no power. They will smell the falsehood." A flicker crossed Orion's eyes, a brief, unreadable tightening of the scar tissue near his lip. "Then you will ensure they do not smell a falsehood. You will present yourself as my willing choice, my necessary equal. You will act the role of the consort who is fully bound to my will. And if I refuse to act, Alora challenged, pushing the boundary hard, then the pack I claim you from will discover the price of interference, Orion stated, his voice now dangerously low, a simple promise of brutality. I do not negotiate with my necessities, Alora. Your obedience is the condition for your survival. Do not test it again. The unspoken bond. The dialogue stalled, leaving the unspoken truth screaming in the void between them. Alora slowly turned her attention back to the fire, but she could feel the heat not just from the flames, but from his constant, intrusive presence. She noticed a sudden, deep shiver run through Orion's massive shoulders, despite the proximity of the fire. You're injured, she observed quietly. The silver in your arm. Kalen's blow was cleaner than you let on. Orion stiffened. It is a scratch. It will heal. Silver does not scratch, Alora countered. Her eyes, though focusing on the pine boughs, were now assessing his condition with the keen, intellectual value of a true healer, a role hidden by her useless status. It festers. Your scent is already tainted with residual pain and metallic poison. You are slowing. Your pack will know. Your council will know. Your documentation will be useless if you are incapacitated. She gathered the courage to look at him, her gaze now clinical, stripped of fear. I carry a healer's poultice. Let me clean the wound. Orion hesitated for a long, agonizing minute. The tension was immense. It was a test of trust that went against every instinct of a dominant alpha. Finally, with a weary grunt, he pulled back the edge of his leather tunic, exposing the deep, jagged puncture wound on his shoulder. The flesh was angry red, swollen, and faintly smoking where the silver residue was reacting with his alpha power. Alora scooted closer, ignoring the instinctive alarm bells ringing in her omega core. She reached for her small satchel, taking out a salve crafted from specialized mountain moss. This is not affection, she stated, mirroring his earlier words, her voice quiet but firm. This is maintenance. My survival depends on your functional utility. If you fall, I fall harder. She cleaned the wound with meticulous, surprisingly strong focus, pressing the poultice deep into the flesh to draw out the silver. Orion barely flinched, but his breath hitched once, a small, involuntary sound of pain that only her proximity allowed her to hear. As she worked, their scents mingled unavoidably in the small, confined space. Alora's soft, earthy omega scent, normally muted by fear and low status, now reacted to his alpha pain. A pulse, electric and undeniable, flowed from her touch into his wound. Orion looked down at her small, intent face, her dark hair illuminated by the firelight. He felt a sudden, confusing draw, an unfamiliar need to protect the fragile thing tending to his vulnerability. He knew, with the cold certainty of his alpha core, that the scent flowing from her was no mere omega scent. It was mate scent, muffled and strange, but undeniably hers. I rejected you, he stated, his voice a bewildered whisper, breaking the rule of transactional honesty for the first time. Alora didn't stop working. You didn't reject me. You were never offered the claim. Kalen rejected me. I am the unmarked. Orion's hand, large and powerful, reached up and gently, almost tentatively, touched the bare skin of her collarbone, tracing the smooth, empty area where a mate bond mark should have been. The bond, he mumbled, his voice thick with confusion. It is not here, but the scent. It speaks otherwise. Alora finished wrapping the shoulder tightly. She pulled her hands back, ending the contact sharply. The moment of vulnerability was over. She returned to her spot, the cool alpha scent of her healing hands now mingling with the dry cedar on her skin. The bond is silent because the goddess found me wanting, Alora said, lying to protect the cursed truth of her bloodline. I am the Echo, Orion, a genetic fluke. Use me for your politics. Heal quickly and let us fulfill this ridiculous, terrifying bargain. The silence that followed was charged not with political tension, but with the terrifying, forced reality of their unspoken destiny. They were two broken halves, politically bound, sensually drawn, and determined to deny the very magic that had just brought them together. Orion picked up his knife again, but he did not sharpen it. He simply held it, staring at the fire, the truth of the mate bond, the one thing he could not control or command, now the most dangerous secret in their fragile, confined space. Chapter 4. The Intellect of the Echo. The Threat Phase. The Scent of Iron and Spite. The first sign of the consequences of their escape was not sight or sound, but scent, a familiar mocking cocktail carried on the dawn wind, fresh pine, metallic blood, and the high, whining scent of spite. The Meadow Pack was not sending scouts. They were sending hunters, led by Alpha Kalen himself, tracking the overwhelming, unmistakable signature of Orion's retreat. Orion was on his feet instantly, his injured shoulder protesting the sudden movement. He moved with the silence of a collapsing mountain, crushing the dying embers of the fire with his massive boot. The air, which had briefly smelled of cedar and healing moss, was now choked with the odor of imminent violence. "They are too fast," Orion stated, his voice a low, gravelly rumble. He moved to the edge of the overhang, his eyes scanning the dense, misty forest below. Kalen should not be able to track a northern alpha this cleanly. They have used something, a trail scent, or perhaps they have captured one of my outer scouts. Alora stood beside him, clutching her small satchel, her mind racing. Fear was a cold knot in her stomach, but the presence of the immediate threat, a puzzle to solve, strangely quelled the deep internal shame. Her senses, though omega weak for physical shifting, were preternaturally fine-tuned for deduction and chemical analysis, a trait passed down from her healer mother. "It is not a scout," Alora said, her voice surprisingly steady, considering the roaring alpha standing inches from her. "It is Lyra's musk. Her signature is laced with Kalen's aggression, but under that, I smell a specific resin, mountain belladonna. It's a scent used by our senior trackers to fixate on a dominant alpha musk. They aren't tracking us. They are tracking the amplified, angry trail you left when you shifted and challenged Kalen last night." Orion shot her a look of pure, cold incredulity. "You can identify a specific tracking resin in the wind? You are the Echo, the wolf who barely shifts." "My body is weak, Alpha," Alora retorted, impatience overriding fear. "My senses are not. While your dominant nose focuses on the overriding presence of other alphas, mine filters the subtleties. I was raised by healers and trackers. The belladonna will fade in strong running water. We need to lose the scent trail immediately." The intellect of the Echo, the first siege. The exchange was brutally efficient. Orion's mind, trained for brute force and direct combat, processed the information with reluctant speed. He looked at the topography. Dense forest, sloping down toward a wide, shallow river that snaked across the valley floor. "If we move to the water, we lose speed," Orion argued, already calculating the risks. "They will cut us off at the riverbank." "No. If you run, they will predict your path and intercept you at the Ponderosa bottleneck, the usual crossing point," Alora countered, pointing to a narrow curve on a mental map she carried. "They know your tactics are direct. We must counter with something Kalen would never consider, retreating into their own territory." Orion paused, his eyes narrowing as he absorbed the shock of the suggestion. "Madness. To cross back into hostile land. It is the only place they will not look for your colossal signature," Alora interrupted, cutting off the Alpha King, a feat that would have earned her death in any other circumstance. "They assume you are fleeing north to your own land. We circle back south toward the edge of the Meadow Pack's outer farms. We lose the belladonna trail in the river. Then use the complex, crisscrossing scents of the farm roads to hide your enormous scent behind 1,000 smaller scents: cattle, soil, fertilizer, harvested crops. They will be looking for a tidal wave. We give them a swamp. The silence that followed stretched for minutes. The only sound the wind and the distant, muffled thump-thump of Kalen's pursuit pack closing the gap. This was the true test of their forced alliance. Orion's pride against his survival. His entire alpha training screamed at him to dominate and dismiss. His survival instincts screamed at him that the echo had provided the only viable solution. "We go," Orion finally commanded, his voice gruff, the simple acceptance of her strategy a massive, silent shift in their dynamic. He trusted her intellect, even if he still hated her presence. The implementation and forced reliance, the extended pursuit. The retreat was agonizing. They ran down the slope, hitting the river's edge, moving through the cold, knee-deep water for nearly an hour, ensuring every trace of the belladonna-enhanced alpha scent was washed clean. Alora's small frame was quickly exhausted, her breathing ragged, but the fear of failure drove her forward faster than her physical weakness allowed. When they finally broke free of the water, they were soaking, shivering, and facing the massive effort of circling back. Orion, despite his injury, ran with relentless iron precision. But he had to continuously modulate his pace to match Alora's endurance, a tactical necessity that visibly grated on his alpha impatience. "Faster, Omega," Orion grunted, his voice tight. "I am moving at my peak capacity." "Alpha," Alora gasped, pushing her legs harder. "If I fail, you are exposed. You need the belladonna scent to fade completely. We must run smart, not just fast." The forced dialogue, delivered through gasps and clipped commands, was their only mode of communication. Their proximity was no longer a matter of fear, but necessity. They were two pieces of a single, fragile machine. They reached the perimeter of the farm roads just as the sun climbed high. The strategy worked instantly. The overwhelming mixed sense of domesticated life, the clutter of humanity and small animals, swallowed Orion's powerful scent. Orion shifted to human form, pulling Alora into the dark shadow of a dilapidated storage shed. They pressed against the cold wood, listening. The pursuit pack, Kalen, Lyra, and 5 strong betas, thundered past their hiding spot on the main road, their frustration palpable. "The scent is lost!" Lyra shrieked, her voice edged with panic. "He must have shifted and flown north. They doubled back." "He wouldn't!" Kalen roared. "Orion only moves forward. They must have used a temporary nullifier. Fan out! We searched the northern trails." As the sounds of their frustrated departure faded, Orion let out a breath he seemed to have been holding since the river. He looked down at Alora, his massive body still pressed tightly against her smaller frame in the shadow of the shed. "You led us back into their home territory," he stated, his voice a disbelieving marvel. "And they ran straight past us." "They ran past the alpha of the northern peaks," Alora corrected, her heart still hammering against her ribs. "They didn't run past the unchosen echo. I told you, Alpha. You are looking for a powerful wolf who acts only on instinct. I am not a powerful wolf. I observe patterns." The consequence and the pivot. The immediate danger was gone, but the long-term consequence was clear. Kalen's pack would now suspect Orion had outside help and would redouble their efforts, possibly calling on allies. Orion released her, stepping back just enough to study her, his amber eyes piercing her own. He was a king who had just been saved by a pawn he considered worthless. The shame of his temporary weakness warred violently with the relief of his survival. "Your intellect is a weapon," Orion conceded, the words clearly painful for him to utter. "A weapon I now possess. But you understand the risk. The moment my council discovers I rely on a cursed Omega for tactical strategy, I am finished. They are already seeking an excuse for usurpation. Then we will ensure your council does not discover my utility, Alora said, rubbing the circulation back into her arms. Tell me exactly what they fear. What is the central vulnerability in your claim to the peaks? You said they need proof your line is secured. That means the conflict is not about borders, but about succession. Orion hesitated for a full, tense minute. He looked utterly conflicted, a creature of absolute solitude forced to divulge his deepest vulnerability to the very person he claimed to be a mere contract. My authority is absolute, Orion finally admitted, his voice barely audible above the rustling corn stalks nearby. But my succession is not. The elders of the northern peaks require me to marry a fertile mate who can immediately bear an heir to stabilize the alliance and secure the throne. They have given me until the first winter snows. If I fail, the council appoints an interim alpha, a figurehead they can manipulate. Alora felt a chilling comprehension wash over her. And the Echo Curse, the barrenness Kalen publicly announced, that gives your enemies the perfect loophole. If I am barren, the contract is invalid, and your time runs out faster. Exactly, Orion confirmed, the raw frustration evident in the tightening of his massive fists. I needed a consort immediately to buy time. I chose you because you were unclaimed, unaligned, and politically weak. A simple move to gain a few months. I did not account for the publicity of your curse. Alora looked down at her hands. The familiar shame trying to rise again, but she pushed it down. She had been insulted, hunted, and used, but she was not helpless. Then our contract changes, Alora stated, stepping forward, taking the initiative in a shocking display of Omega defiance. Your survival requires that I am perceived as capable of providing an heir, regardless of the curse. I cannot give you a fertile Luna, but I can give you a solution. She looked up at him, her eyes bright with sudden, fierce cunning. Tell me everything about the history of the Northern Peak succession laws. Tell me every loophole, every ancient ritual, every forgotten rule. You need a shield for your alpha power. I am that shield, but I will not operate in the dark. Your secret is my weapon now, Alpha. Orion, the ruthless Alpha King, was trapped. He was wounded, hunted, and now entirely reliant on the intellect of the small, unmarked Omega he had claimed out of desperate convenience. His silence was the sound of his absolute surrender to her tactical superiority. That's an epic runtime for the ultimate high-stakes romance trope, the fake mate bond. To fill 3.5 hours without fluff, we must meticulously detail the ancient rituals Alora knows, the sensory trauma of their forced proximity, and the intricate verbal sparring that defines their emotional and political barriers. This chapter is a siege on their personal space and their emotional control. Chapter 5. The Stolen Ritual. The Intimacy Phase. The Price of Deception. The moment Alora declared their contract altered, the atmosphere shifted from mere danger to a terrifying new intimacy. Orion, wounded, exposed, and tactically defeated, had no choice but to comply. They spent the next 24 hours deep in a hidden cave system known only to ancient healers, where the echoes of the Meadowpack pursuit finally faded. Orion provided a detailed, exhaustive download of the Northern Peaks' history. He explained that his council's power was rooted in the runic seal of succession, an ancient rite demanding tangible proof of the Alpha's stability through a visibly accepted mate. His vulnerability wasn't just his unwed status. It was the political maneuver of his rival, his own beta, Varric, who was campaigning on the promise of a pure, fertile succession, directly targeting Alora's supposed barrenness. Varric and his faction are already sending emissaries to the border, Orion stated, his massive body tense as he leaned against the cold cave wall. If we show up with an Omega who is publicly known as the Echo, he will challenge the claim on sight. We have 2 days before the next council meeting. Then we will ensure he smells only a willing mate bond. Not an invalid contract, Alora countered, setting down the notes she had scribbled on dried leaves. The Meadowpack's weakness is their focus on surface power. I know an older, forgotten ritual, a bonding rite predating the runic seal. It's a healer's magic, an Omega-specific ceremony designed not to seal a true mate bond, but to mimic the external scent and emotional compliance of one. Orion's eyes narrowed, his alpha instincts bristling against the idea of faking power. Magic? What is the cost of this deception, Alora? The cost is not magic, Orion, Alora corrected, her gaze steady. The cost is absolute, unending proximity. The ritual is called the thrice-bound scrying. It requires 3 days of continuous, shared sensory input and the deliberate exchange of our core sense in a confined space. It will project the illusion of a settled bond to anyone who smells us, but the process itself is deeply invasive. The confined space, sensory invasion. The preparation was meticulous. Alora needed to amplify her own subtle Omega scent, the clean, earthy musk that his alpha nose had recognized as his true mate bond. She prepared specialized herbs, grinding them into a fine dust, then drew a simple triple circle formation on the cave floor using crushed charcoal. We must lie within these circles, Alora instructed, her face impassive despite the gravity of the demand. And we must remain skin to skin for the full duration of the night's ritual. Orion hesitated. This was more than he had bargained for. His alpha reserve was a fortress. This ritual required him to tear down his defenses and allow a political pawn into his inner sanctum. Skin to skin, Orion finally repeated, his voice dangerously low. You understand that this is not a game, Omega. The contact is absolute. You risk my alpha control. And you risk my life if this deception fails, Alpha, Alora returned, meeting his stare. If you break control, you end the contract, and you lose the throne. Now, strip the tunic. The deception requires vulnerability. The next hours were a slow-motion study in mutual torment. They lay down in the circles, Orion, enormous and rigid, Alora, tiny and trembling. She placed her cheek against the cold, iron-hard muscle of his chest, feeling the heavy, uneven beat of his heart against her ear. His injured shoulder, now clean and healing, was against her arm. Alora began the slow, arduous process of the ritual. She wasn't chanting. She was focusing her subtle Omega energy, gently pushing her clean, earthy scent outward, mixing it with the dominant, overwhelming scent of his cedar and steel. The intimacy was excruciating. Every inhale was a deep draft of his terrifying power, every exhale an involuntary offering of her vulnerability. Describe your territory, Alora commanded, needing to keep his mind focused and anchored to his alpha self, preventing instinct from overriding reason. Describe the peaks, the scent of the air there. Orion obliged, speaking in a low, gravelly monotone that filled the small cave. He described the harsh winds, the high, unforgiving snows, and the scent of the native fir, a detailed confession of his deepest, solitary domain. This forced, continuous dialogue was essential to blend their psychic profiles, reinforcing the illusion of a shared life. As the night wore on, the forced proximity became a kind of sensory trauma. Alora couldn't move without touching him. She couldn't breathe without inhaling him. The constant, intrusive scent of cedar, steel, and raw alpha dominance began to short-circuit her fear, replacing it with a strange, dizzying familiarity. She was no longer afraid of his size. She was aware of his weight, his temperature, and the subtle rhythmic contraction of his muscles. At one point, a muscle spasm racked his damaged shoulder. Alora instantly reached up, her small hands bracing the wound. The pain drew an involuntary, thick grunt from Orion. The lie must feel real, Alpha, Alora whispered, her voice husky with exhaustion. You must allow me to be your comfort, even if you hate the sensation." Orion slowly turned his head, his eyes meeting hers in the darkness. "You are not comfort, Omega. You are a dangerous fire that threatens to burn down the entire fortress I built." "Then let it burn," Alora challenged, refusing to break eye contact. "If the fortress is built on lies, it deserves to fall. My survival is tied to your throne. Do not tempt me to sabotage the foundation." The stolen seal. By the third morning, the ritual was complete. They emerged from the cave, their scents now blended seamlessly. To any passing wolf, their musk was the settled, secure signature of a newly mated pair. The illusion was flawless. But the final deception was political, not magical. They had to sell the lie to the most cunning wolves in the peaks. Orion, his shoulder healed, his confidence restored by the efficacy of her cunning, led them toward the northern peaks territory. He began to instruct Alora on the language of the court, the subtle signs of disrespect, and the necessary response to Varric's challenge. "Varric will not attack physically," Orion warned, his voice low as they entered the heavy pines of his territory. "He will attack your status. He will demand the barren proof, a ritual performed by the Elder Council to confirm your fertility status." Alora stopped, freezing mid-step. "The barren proof? That ritual hasn't been used in 3 centuries. It's a blood rite." "It is, and Varric knows I won't risk your blood," which gives him the victory by forfeit, Orion explained, a note of grim defeat entering his voice. "We must counter his challenge before he can make it formal." Alora thought back to the notes she had compiled from Orion's history lesson. She remembered a single obscure line about the runic seal. "You told me the runic seal demands proof of stability through a visibly accepted mate," Alora stated, her eyes widening with a sudden, devastating realization. "It doesn't demand fertility proof. The older ritual required loyalty, not biology. We don't need to pass the barren proof. We need to perform the rite of the unwavering blade." Orion stared at her, stunned. "The unwavering blade? That ritual was discarded because it was deemed too dangerous. It demands that the new consort must identify a magically disguised assassin in the council and publicly execute the challenge. Failure means execution for both." "Exactly," Alora confirmed, a fierce, terrifying calm settling over her. "It is the only thing that will silence Varric without resorting to the barren proof. Varric's faction is betting on my cowardice and my lack of political skill. They think I am a weak, uneducated echo. I will show them I am the Omega who studies the forgotten rules. I will be his bait." The final intimacy of their contract was this. Not the fake scent, but the complete, terrifying merging of their fates. Alora had to lay bare her mind to find the loophole. Orion had to lay bare his life to follow her strategy. They were bound by deception, trust, and the certainty of execution if they failed. "Then we will perform the rite of the unwavering blade," Orion conceded, his alpha arrogance finally replaced by a fierce acceptance of his Omega's genius. He reached out and touched the side of her face, a tender, powerful gesture that broke all his rules. "If we live through this, Alora, the contract will be rewritten, and the price will no longer be mere obedience." Chapter 6. The Unwavering Blade. The confrontation phase, the weight of the peaks. The Northern Peaks Council Hall was not built for comfort. It was built for intimidation. The chamber was carved directly into the mountain rock, massive columns of polished granite supporting a ceiling high enough to feel like the open sky, yet cold enough to feel like a tomb. The air tasted of ancient stone, cold metal, and the heavy, concentrated musk of suspicion. Orion entered first, his towering presence demanding silence. His dark, formal leathers emphasized his massive frame, and the healed wound on his shoulder, though invisible, lent his movements a subtle, dangerous edge. Alora followed, her small figure stark against the scale of the hall. The illusion of the thrice-bound scrying was doing its work. Her scent, seamlessly blended with his cedar and steel, projected the undeniable musk of a claimed compliant mate. The council, 12 elder alphas and betas, sat assembled on a raised dais. Front and center was Varric, Orion's ambitious beta, a lean, silver-haired wolf whose eyes held the cold cunning of a viper. He was the architect of this downfall, and his expression was a carefully practiced mix of feigned loyalty and deep concern. The proceedings began with Orion formally presenting Alora, stating the terms of their union and the urgency of securing the succession before the winter snows. Varric was immediately on his feet, his voice a smooth, treacherous silk. "My king, the council respects the necessity of your union. However, we cannot ignore the whispers carried on the wind, whispers confirmed by the meadow pack itself. This consort, Alora, is publicly known as the Echo, cursed with barrenness. We must petition the barren proof to validate her viability." Orion braced himself. He knew this was the trap. "The barren proof is archaic and unnecessary. My claim is sealed by her presence and my authority." Varric smiled, a cold, predatory flash of teeth. "A king's authority is absolute, but the runic seal is eternal. We merely request the ancient right to clear the air of these rumors. Surely, the new queen consort has nothing to fear from a simple loyalty test." Alora moved forward before Orion could reply. This was her moment, her intellect versus their tradition. She stepped into the center of the granite circle, directly beneath the hall's cold, judgmental light. "The consort fears nothing from tests of loyalty," Alora stated, her voice clear and carrying, her fear meticulously locked down. "However, the council shows a grave lack of respect for the peak's most sacred traditions. The barren proof was superseded centuries ago by the right of the unwavering blade." A wave of shocked silence swept the council. The right was so brutal, so rarely invoked, that many of the younger members exchanged bewildered glances. "The unwavering blade," Varric finally spat, his composure cracking slightly. "That ritual is reserved for threats of internal sabotage. It is a reckless, discarded method. It is the only rite that demands a true test of the consort's loyalty to the king's safety, not their biological function," Alora countered, standing her ground. "Since the council implies internal threats, that the king's own beta is maneuvering against his sovereign, then the unwavering blade is the only appropriate test to secure the throne. I, consort Alora, demand the council perform the rite now." Orion watched, astonished, as Alora wielded her knowledge like a weapon. By demanding the more lethal rite, she forced the council to either agree and risk exposing their hidden assassin, or refuse and instantly confirm Varric's treachery. They were trapped by their own devotion to arcane law. The elders exchanged frantic whispers. Finally, the eldest alpha, his face grim, gave a slow, reluctant nod. "The consort's request is valid. Prepare the blade. The unwavering blade, the extended trial." The central altar was cleared. A single obsidian-hilted dagger, the unwavering blade, was placed upon it. The elder alpha explained the rules with chilling formality. "Among the council members present, one is magically masked, harboring the intent to assassinate the king this night. The consort must identify the assassin through scent, sight, and pure instinct. The consort will take the blade, walk the circle, and execute the challenge. If the wrong wolf is chosen, the consort is executed immediately, and the king's line is invalidated." Alora walked toward the dagger, her small hand reaching for the hilt. The silence was absolute. The weight of the next few minutes was meant to crush her. She lifted the blade. The obsidian was cold, rough, and sharp. She had to walk a full circle around the council dais, moving agonizingly slow to heighten the tension and give the illusion of deep concentration. The challenge was designed to fail. The true assassin would be magically masked by Varric's subtle counter-magic, making their scent and presence invisible to all but the most powerful alphas, and certainly invisible to a supposedly weak Omega. Alora began her slow procession. She had to stretch every sensory input to its absolute limit, maintaining the deception of the fake mate bond while searching for the crack in the reality of the council. Minute by minute, the narrative focuses on her internal analysis. Scent analysis. She filtered the council's musk, mostly pine and stone, heavy alpha authority. She searched for the false note, not the scent of the assassin, but the specific lack of scent where it should be. The assassin was likely shielded by a counterspell that nullified all magical signatures, including his own. Visual analysis. She studied faces, looking for the telltale signs of magical strain. Every wolf looked smug, bored, or feigning calm. Varric, however, looked entirely too calm, his eyes slightly glazed, a sign that his own counter-magic was actively working. The touchstone, Orion. As she passed Orion, she briefly brushed his arm. She drew strength from the thrice-bound scrying, the memory of his cedar and steel scent. She used that dominant alpha musk as a baseline for reality. She completed the first excruciating pass. No sign. The second pass was slower. Doubt was beginning to snake through her mind. Was Varric the assassin, or was he merely shielding his accomplice? If she chose Varric and he was innocent, both she and Orion would die. On the third pass, Alora's cunning took over. She realized the deception wasn't in the scent of the assassin, but in the scent of the deception itself. She stopped directly in front of a heavy-set beta named Rix, a wolf who had been silently mocking her since she entered the hall. "The magic shielding the assassin is strong," Alora announced, her voice echoing in the vast chamber. "But all magic leaves a footprint. The assassin is the one who smells the cleanest." She pointed the blade directly at Rix. "You, Rix. Your scent is utterly clean. There is no trace of fear, no trace of the council's musk, and no trace of the ambient stone. You are shielded by a powerful counterspell. You are the hidden blade." Varric roared with false indignation. "A clean scent is a loyal scent, Alora. You are making a mockery of this right." "If your claim is true, Varric," Alora challenged, "then you will allow me to expose the deception." The climax and execution Orion, trusting Alora's intellect absolutely, gave a single hard nod. Alora plunged the obsidian blade not into Rix's chest, but directly into the granite floor, inches from Rix's foot. The effect was instantaneous and shocking. The ancient reactive magic of the right was triggered by the blade's proximity to the assassin. A bolt of dark, internal magic, the residual energy of Rix's assassination spell, snapped outward from Rix's chest, hitting the granite column behind Alora with the sound of cracking bone. Rix instantly screamed, the counterspell broken, his scent flooding the hall with the raw metallic stink of fear and betrayal. He was clearly, undeniably the magically hidden threat. Varric was on his feet, pure fury twisting his features. "An illegal maneuver. You did not execute." "I executed the deception, Beta Varric," Alora said, pulling the blade free, the tip smeared with Rix's residual traitorous magic. "The right demands the exposure of the threat, not the death of the king's Beta. That decision is left to the king." She turned and presented the contaminated blade to Orion, her hand steady. Orion took the blade. He stared at Varric, who was now sweating and sputtering denials. Orion didn't hesitate. He thrust the blade straight into Varric's chest. Varric gasped, collapsing instantly. Orion's eyes, cold and absolute, scanned the remaining council members. "The threat to the peak's stability has been removed," Orion announced, his voice reverberating through the hall. "The consort has proven her intelligence, her loyalty, and her claim to the throne. The runic seal is complete." He pulled Alora to his side, his arm a band of iron around her waist. The blending of their scents, which had been a political trick, now felt like the only truth in the room. The elders, terrified into immediate obedience, bowed low. The claim was sealed, the internal threat destroyed, and the Echo was now undeniably the queen consort of the northern peaks. The aftermath of victory. Orion led Alora out of the hall, the silence replaced by the frantic, subservient movements of the remaining council. Once outside the chamber, away from the prying eyes, Orion stopped. He looked down at Alora, his massive body trembling slightly from the adrenaline and the shock of his own decisive action. "You risked everything," he murmured, his voice thick with a mix of awe and possessiveness. "You used my own law to save my life. You are not an Echo, Omega. You are the only true weapon I possess." He didn't mention the mate bond, but his thumb gently brushed the faint Echo mark on her neck. "The contract is void. You are not a necessity. You are my equal, and you are mine." The political battle was won, but the emotional war, the acceptance of their undeniable, powerful connection, had just begun. That is a massive commitment to the emotional fallout, a 4.3-hour deep dive into the real intimacy, which, in this context, is the psychological and political hurdle of two emotionally stunted wolves learning to coexist and rule. We will sustain this extreme length by focusing on the detailed, slow-burn tension within their shared quarters, the sensory reality of the mate bond now that the barrier is down, and the intricate political problems Alora must solve. The fluff is replaced by relentless emotional pressure and political detail. Chapter 7. The burden of belonging. The intimacy phase. Real. The walls of granite and pride. The victory was absolute, the transfer of power seamless, but the peace was razor-thin. Alora was no longer the political pawn. She was the queen consort who had saved the throne. Yet, the emotional walls between her and Orion remained, two massive, unyielding structures built of past rejection and solitary dominance. Orion had moved Alora into his personal chambers within the highest tower of the Northern Peaks stronghold. The space was vast, cold, and utterly masculine. Carved granite, dark furs, and the overwhelming, concentrated scent of cedar and solitary power. It was a throne room disguised as a bedroom, and Alora felt less like a queen and more like a captured prize displayed in an impenetrable vault. The deception was over, but the forced proximity remained, now amplified by the reality of the mate bond neither would acknowledge. The thrice-bound scrying had done its work too well. Their scents were now so deeply mingled that being apart felt physically unnatural to both. Yet being together was an exhausting battle of wills. "You will not attend the council meeting today," Orion commanded that first morning, his back to Alora as he strapped on his heavy armor. His voice was gruff, an automatic reflex of authority. "Your presence has served its purpose. Now, you rest." Alora, who was sitting at a massive carved table reviewing the old treaties she'd salvaged, didn't look up. "My purpose, Alpha, is no longer solely tactical. The Council knows you value my counsel, a necessity you publicly demonstrated by allowing me to save your life. If I disappear now, you confirm Varric's faction's final claim, that I am merely a hidden witch who uses temporary magic, not a legitimate partner." Orion turned, his face a mask of frustration, his amber eyes fixed on her. "You are safe here. My pack will obey you. That is enough." "It is not enough," Alora snapped, rising to her feet. "It is never enough for an Echo. I spent my life being invisible, Orion. I will not be invisible again, even if it is behind the shield of your power. The threat is not Varric's ghost. It is the instability of your authority. They respect strength, not absence." The argument was a cover for the true tension. He wanted to protect her, and she desperately craved agency. Their proximity made every conversation an immediate escalation. The real intimacy, emotional and physical barriers. The emotional intimacy of their relationship was revealed not in a shared touch, but in the brutal necessity of sharing command. Alora insisted on reviewing the council's reports on border skirmishes, recognizing immediately that the disputes weren't random attacks, but targeted thefts orchestrated by Varric's remaining allies to deplete the peak's resources. She discovered that the supply routes Orion thought were secure were actually reliant on old, corrupt contracts from the Meadow Pack, her former home. "You didn't trust me enough to show me these contracts before," Alora stated one night, her voice heavy with disappointment, holding a stack of dusty parchment. They were standing mere inches apart, both exhausted, both consumed by work. "I didn't trust anyone with the vulnerabilities of the peak," Orion confessed, the admittance of fault a startling, rare breach in his alpha armor. "My solitude was my strength." "And your solitude almost killed you," Alora countered, her eyes searching his. "The Meadow Pack contracts are bleeding you dry. I know their systems. I know their weakness." "You need my weakness to fix your strength." The sensory intimacy was constant. They slept in the same massive bed, Orion rigidly on his side, Alora clinging to the very edge, yet the mate bond made itself known through subtle, undeniable channels. If one shifted in the night, the other woke instantly. If Alora's cold feet touched Orion's legs, his entire body would instantly go rigid, yet he would never move away. One night, Alora woke from a nightmare, a return to the humiliation phase, hearing Kalen's roar and the mocking laughter. She gasped, sitting up. Orion was instantly awake, not with a command, but with a low, questioning growl. He didn't offer comfort. He didn't touch her. He simply remained where he was, a mountain of silent presence, forcing the space between them to fill with the realization of safety. "The laughter," Alora whispered, her voice shaking. "It was the glade, the mockery." "The mockery is over," Orion stated, his voice a low, resonant wave. "They cannot touch you here. Your shame is irrelevant. Your worth is proven. Now, sleep." It was not romantic, but it was profoundly moving. He didn't try to erase her pain. He simply asserted the absolute physical reality that the external threat was gone, replaced by his protective will. The governing conflict, rewriting the rules. The true test of their real intimacy was their ability to govern. Alora convinced Orion to hold an immediate public meeting with the regional alphas of the peak, not to demand fealty, but to offer solutions to the supply problem she had uncovered. She stood beside Orion, her small figure a beacon of composure. When one alpha scoffed at her suggestion of renegotiating a key supply route, a route only the Meadow Pack controlled, Alora didn't falter. "The old contracts demand 60% of our tax revenue for 40% of the goods," Alora stated, relying on her sharp memory and meticulous notes. "I know the Meadow Pack's true profit margin. I propose we offer them 50% of the goods for 35% of the revenue, but demand a binding 5-year term of absolute compliance. This gives them security but saves the peaks 25% of its immediate capital. It is a win-win disguised as a negotiation." The alphas were stunned. They were used to war and force, not arithmetic and cunning. "How do you know those numbers, consort?" a gruff beta demanded. "Because I am the echo," Alora replied, her eyes flashing with cold confidence. "I was an invisible shame. I learned to watch, to listen, and to calculate the true cost of every transaction. I know the weaknesses of the Meadow Pack's books better than their own alpha. Use my weakness as your strength, or dismiss me and starve." Orion watched Alora command the loyalty of his fiercest subordinates not with a roar, but with a quiet, undeniable logic. He saw the true alpha in her, not the physical one, but the governing one. Later that day, Alora and Orion stood on the ramparts, overlooking the harsh, beautiful landscape of the peaks. "You command them better than I do," Orion admitted, looking out at his domain. "They follow your intellect, Alora. They follow your logic, not my force. This is not what I expected." "I am not what anyone expected, Alpha," Alora said, finally turning to him. "And neither are you. You think you rule by fear, but you rule by loneliness. You keep everyone at a distance, including your mate. That is the final vulnerability. If your rivals cannot break your physical power, they will attack your solitude." She moved toward him, the ultimate boundary challenge. She placed her small hand flat against his massive chest, directly over his heart. "The deception is over," Alora said, her voice steady. "The council is subservient. We are now truly alone, Orion. So, tell me the real name of your fear. Not the political fear, the fear that made you choose the Echo." Orion stood still, the immense structure of his defenses finally trembling under the weight of her honesty. His amber eyes, usually cold and calculating, were vulnerable, exposed by the constant grinding pressure of their shared existence. He covered her hand with his own, a gesture that acknowledged the mate bond, the alliance, and the terrifying price of true connection. He was silent, his silence now not a command, but a confession of a lifetime spent alone. The silence was the longest, most real part of their intimacy, a 4-hour admission that both Alora and Orion, the unchosen Omega and the solitary King, were finally, irrevocably bound by their mutual need for an honest partner. Chapter 8. The Cost of the Echo and the Crown. The Resolution Phase, the Confined Heart. The day after the regional alphas submitted to Alora's renegotiated contracts, a tenuous peace settled over the northern peaks. The immediate political threat was neutralized. Orion's throne was secure, saved not by his strength, but by her subtlety. Yet, the emotional vacuum left by the victory was immense. Orion led Alora away from the imposing granite citadel, forcing a break from the political pressure cooker. He took her to a remote, glass-like lake high in the mountains, a place of absolute crystalline stillness. The vastness of the space only amplified the confined, chaotic nature of their feelings. They stood at the lake's edge, the cold air carrying the clean scent of water and the intense, inseparable scent of their combined musk. The transactional honesty that defined their contract had to be replaced by a terrifying, real honesty. "You asked me the name of my fear," Orion began, his voice low, addressing the lake more than Alora. "It is not the political council. I can crush them. My fear is loneliness. I was raised knowing my dominance was a cage. Every consort presented to me wanted the title, the power, or the territory. They did not want the man who carried the heaviest crown." He finally turned to her, his gaze intense. "I chose you because you were worthless to everyone else. I believed a woman with no power would demand nothing but survival, which was a currency I could easily pay. I saw a tool." Alora met his confession with her own equally brutal truth. "And I accepted because my loneliness was a curse. I accepted the terms because the risk of being used by a dominant alpha was less painful than the guarantee of being unwanted by my own pack. I saw you as a shield, a monster powerful enough to deflect the world's cruelty." She stepped toward him, bridging the emotional gap. "The contract is broken, Orion. You are more than a monster, and I am more than a tool. We are mates, a fact the scent of your skin screams at me every hour. But the curse remains." The reality of the cursed succession. The reality of the cursed succession, Alora's widely publicized barrenness, was the final, highest wall between them. The political threat had been masked, but the biological reality could not be bargained away. "The council will wait," Orion stated, his jaw tight. "They will allow the winter to pass. If you do not show signs of pregnancy by the first thaw, the law allows them to challenge my claim, not on my competence, but on the viability of the Thorn line. They will claim the throne is cursed through my choice." Alora sat down on a mossy bank, pulling out the old healer's texts she still carried. "Then we must prove the source of the curse is external, not biological. The echo curse is real, Orion. My mother was deemed barren because her lineage, a very minor line of healers, had been magically interfered with generations ago by a rival clan seeking to diminish the Meadowpack. It was a fertility block, not a genetic failure." Alora explained her theory. The curse was a specialized energy dampener, designed to nullify the reproductive cycles of minor omega lines. The power had faded over time, but the residual magic was enough to make the mate bond sterile. "The good news," Alora said, looking up, a flicker of scientific excitement in her eyes, "is that since the cause is magical, the cure is magical. The dampener must be reversed. The bad news? To reverse it, I need a specific, extremely rare catalyst, crystallized voidstone." Orion stared at her, dumbfounded. "Voidstone? It is a myth, Alora, a legend from the Shadow Wars. It is said to absorb all light and power. It doesn't exist." "It exists," Alora insisted, her logic absolute. "My mother's texts detail the clan that cast the spell. They were wiped out by the Peak centuries ago, but their stronghold was never fully explored. It was called the Silent Keep. They had a repository of arcane ingredients. The Void Stone, if it exists, is there." The resolution phase pivoted from emotional confrontation to a desperate shared quest. They were no longer discussing feelings. They were planning a highly dangerous, deep territory extraction of a mythological item. The silence between them became one of shared purpose. The final intimacy, shared purpose and concession. The return journey to the Citadel was spent mapping out the location of the Silent Keep. The true intimacy was found in the detailed, shared planning. "The keep is buried deep beneath the Ironwood Forest," Orion informed her, pointing to an old, cracked map. "It is guarded by ancient, dormant magic, traps, not wolves. Force will fail. We need subtlety." "We need my Omega magic," Alora stated simply. "My senses, which can track a belladonna resin in the wind, can track a dormant magical tripwire. But I cannot do it alone. You must be the anchor." Orion looked at her, his expression softening into a complex mix of admiration and affection. He realized he was not only relying on her intellect for governance, but on her cursed, subtle magic for survival. "If we find the Void Stone," Orion said, his voice dropping to a low, intimate rumble, "and you break the curse, and you conceive an heir. What then, Alora? Will you stay? Will you demand the freedom your people lost?" This was the final, deepest point of the emotional resolution. Alora reached up and traced the edge of the scar on his cheek, the physical mark of his isolation. "I will not demand freedom, Orion. I will demand partnership. I demand that you never hide your vulnerability from me again. I demand that we govern with honesty, not fear." She pulled her hand away. "And as for staying, the echo finally belongs somewhere. I belong here, but I will not be your shield. I will be your equal." Orion reached for her, his movement slow, intentional, and utterly devoid of the dominant alpha command. He framed her face in his immense, scarred hands. "I will give you an army if you demand it, Alora," he confessed, his voice heavy with raw truth. "But my only wish is for you to be my mate, not my weapon." He sealed the resolution not with a command, but with a kiss that was initially cautious, tentative, but quickly deepened into the undeniable, profound reality of their mate bond. It was a kiss that honored the echo who studied treaties and the king who admitted loneliness. The political resolution was complete. The emotional resolution was finalized. The only thing left was the Silent Keep. Chapter 9. The Silent Keep and the Blind Strength. The Quest Phase. The Ironwood Entrance. The journey to the Ironwood Forest was silent, fueled by mutual purpose. The forest itself was a desolate monument to the ancient clan that had cursed Alora's line. The trees were massive, iron-hard, and devoid of life, blocking all sunlight. The air, normally rich with the scent of pine, held only the sterile, cold odor of old, residual magic, a dead mineral smell that even Orion's powerful alpha nose struggled to parse. They located the Silent Keep's entrance at the base of a forgotten ravine, a massive slab of basalt, half covered by centuries of sediment. Orion, fueled by a mixture of adrenaline and the primal need to resolve his mate's curse, instantly shifted. His iron-gray wolf, Umbra, was a terrifying display of raw power. "I will force it open," Orion commanded telepathically, already bracing his massive shoulders against the stone. "Stop!" Alora's frantic mental command cut through his dominance. "You can't. This entire structure is built to resist brute force. If you use your alpha strength here, you will trigger every magical alarm in the perimeter. We must go slow." Alora shifted to her own form, the small, swift gray wolf, the form that had been publicly mocked as useless. She was tiny against his bulk, but her small paws were steady on the cold ground. "The magic here is dormant, Alpha," Alora explained, speaking through the bond with clinical focus. "It's a network of proximity sensors, not structural defenses. The trick is not force, it is silence and subtraction. We must move as though we don't exist." She instructed Orion to use his sharp claws to dig around the base of the slab, not to lift it, but to disrupt the ground under it. Once the stabilizing earth was loose, Alora used her small nose to nudge aside a collection of perfectly circular, smooth stones, a minor detail Orion's rage would have missed. As the stones moved, a soft, psychic click resonated in Alora's mind. The basalt slab, now unbalanced, quietly slid inward, revealing a cold, breath-stealing darkness. The infiltration, the trap network. The corridor was narrow, steep, and entirely devoid of light. The residual magic was intense here, a thick psychic fog that choked Orion's senses. He relied entirely on Alora, the Omega whose specialized sensitivity could read the arcane residue. "I need to be touching you," Alora commanded. "My senses can map the traps, but your alpha power must act as an anchor, grounding my perception in reality. You lead, but you move only where I tell you." Orion shifted back to his human form, a decision born of tactical necessity, not convenience. His huge hand swallowed Alora's small one, and they began the descent, their movements a synchronized, painstaking shuffle. The traps were not crude snares, they were magical tripwires, designed to react to any significant displacement of power, alpha or omega. "Stop," Alora whispered, dragging on his arm. "3 steps ahead to your right. There is a stasis coil woven into the dust on the floor. If any object of sufficient mass crosses it, it will paralyze you instantly." Orion halted, his boot inches from the unseen barrier. He relied on the frantic clarity in Alora's voice, the only thing cutting through the darkness. "How do we pass it?" Orion asked, his voice low with forced patience. "You step over it, but not with your current velocity. You must slow your molecular rhythm," Alora instructed, pulling on a piece of forgotten Omega wisdom. "You must think yourself lighter than air. I will guide the energy." Alora used her own muted Omega magic, focusing a small, sharp pulse of hollow moon energy to temporarily depower the space around his foot, momentarily shielding the trap from the reality of his alpha mass. Orion moved his leg, a slow, agonizing minute to cross the short distance. He felt a faint, cold whisper of energy brush his ankle, but the trap remained silent. They encountered another trap, a series of runes carved into the ceiling, activated by a sonic trigger. Whispering runes, Alora noted. Any sound above a breath will collapse the ceiling. They communicated entirely through the mate bond, sending crisp, nonverbal commands and acknowledgments. This sustained silence forced a new level of intimate trust. Orion had to fully relinquish his instinct to dominate. Alora had to fully trust his immense physical self-control. The Void Stone Repository. The corridor opened into a vast, circular chamber. In the center, on a raised obsidian pedestal, rested the prize, the Void Stone. It was not dramatic or glowing. It was simply a fist-sized chunk of crystalline rock that absorbed all ambient light, looking like a hole punched in reality. The air around it was ice-cold, and the oppressive magical silence was overwhelming. "The power dampener," Alora breathed, her voice a mix of awe and terror. "It's real! The curse is real!" But the chamber was not unguarded. Two massive, shadow-like figures coalesced from the darkness near the stone, dormant wardens, creatures of pure magical residue designed to protect the artifact. "They're Alpha-class elemental projections," Orion warned telepathically, shifting his hand to his weapon. "Force will dispel them, but it will take time." "Force will also destroy the stone," Alora countered. "The wardens are tied to the ambient magic of the room. We can't fight them. We have to confuse them." Alora's solution was an immediate, terrifying gamble. She used the power of their fake mate bond, the thrice-bound scrying, to override the reality of the room. "Think of the glade, Orion, the fire, the laughter, the overwhelming scent of the celebration," Alora commanded through the bond, forcing him to project the memory. Orion, trusting her implicitly, slammed his mind into the image, projecting the massive, blinding energy of the Moon Ridge ceremony. The wardens stopped, their shadowed forms wavering. They were ancient projections, designed to recognize the singular cold magic of the keep. They could not process the overwhelming, chaotic, modern life force that Orion was projecting. Extraction and escape. While the wardens flickered in confusion, Alora sprinted forward, her small omega frame darting beneath the warden's chaotic energy field. She reached the obsidian pedestal. The stone was shockingly cold. The instant her hand closed around it, a powerful jolt of draining energy shot up her arm. The stone was absorbing her omega magic, threatening to extinguish the little power she had left. "It's draining me! It is designed to nullify magic!" Alora cried out, her energy fading rapidly. Orion's response was not tactical, but primal. Seeing his mate in danger, he let out a guttural, terrifying roar, shattering the silence of the keep. He shifted instantly, his massive umbra form bursting with uncontrolled alpha power, a torrent of life, scent, and brute force that overwhelmed the delicate balance of the keep. The wardens, unable to process the combination of the projected celebration and the violent eruption of alpha power, were instantly dispelled, dissolving into smoke. Orion's uncontrolled shift, however, triggered every structural alarm in the silent keep. The cavern began to groan, stone tearing free from the walls. "We move! Now!" Orion roared, grabbing Alora, who was now weakened and stumbling, and placing her carefully inside the leather satchel he wore slung across his back. The escape was a blur of violence and speed. Orion relied purely on his unwavering physical power, smashing through walls and obstacles that would have taken hours to navigate, ignoring the collapse of the structure around him. They burst out of the ironwood entrance just as the entire ravine began to give way. Orion ran, the void stone safe in the satchel with Alora, the scent of cedar, steel, and victory thick in the air. They had the stone. The quest phase was over. But the terrifying process of using the nullifying artifact to break a curse based on nullification was just beginning. Chapter 10. the nullification and the new dawn, the cure phase and resolution. The journey back to the peaks was a blur. Orion, his protective instincts in overdrive, moved with punishing speed. He had the Void Stone and his mate, nothing else mattered. They returned not to the Citadel, but to the deepest, most isolated section of the Healer's archives, a place where the residual magical energies of the stone could do minimal harm. The cure phase, the Void's embrace. The Void Stone, now fully exposed, pulsed with cold dread, leeching the light and energy from the room. Alora, weakened but resolute, knew this was the final, most dangerous gamble. The curse on her blood was a subtractive magic, a fertility dampener. The Void Stone was a total nullifier. The hope was that one negative would erase the other. The process must be precise, Alora instructed, her voice steady despite the trembling of her hands. The stone will try to drain all my energy, not just the curse. You must act as the regulator, Orion. You must be the anchor that holds my life force in place. Alora positioned the stone against the faint echo mark on her collarbone. The instant contact was a shock wave. Alora gasped, the sudden drain of energy leaving her cold, disoriented, and momentarily deaf. The room seemed to whirl. The Void Stone was doing its work, stripping away both the ancient curse and her current strength. Orion, however, was ready. He bypassed touch and used the mate bond, the very thing he had feared and denied, as the ultimate anchor. He flooded the connection with his sheer, brutal alpha power, a pure torrent of life force that counteracted the stone's destructive draw. He didn't use finesse. He used presence. He was a wall of life against the stone's vacuum. Alora focused on the receding coldness in her blood, the feeling of the curse dissolving. She held on to the single, overwhelming thought in the bond: Orion's strength. The process was agonizing, lasting what felt like hours, but finally, the draining stopped. Alora slumped forward, exhausted, but with a profound internal sense of wholeness. The Void Stone, having served its purpose, simply cracked and crumbled into inert dust. "It's gone," Alora whispered, touching the space on her neck. The skin was warm, no longer marked by the faint coldness of the echo. The curse was broken. Orion gently lifted his mate, relief washing over him in a flood. He didn't speak of political victories or succession. He spoke of belonging. "You are no longer the echo," Orion murmured, his voice thick with emotion. "You are just Alora, and you are mine." The New Dawn, Epilogue. The subsequent months were a period of unprecedented stability and growth for the northern peaks. The political challenges had vanished. The throne was secured not by fear, but by the visible, powerful partnership of its Alpha and Luna. And with the first thaw of spring, the final piece of their destiny was revealed. Alora, the woman cursed as barren, carried the Alpha King's twin heirs. The news silenced every whisper of dissent and sealed their legacy forever. Orion ruled with his queen at his side, using her intellect to govern and his strength to protect. Their intimacy was found not in grand pronouncements, but in the shared, quiet moments of planning, the necessary trust, and the certainty that they were each the only person capable of seeing the other's true worth. The unchosen Omega had not merely found a mate, she had forged a kingdom. Lessons from the Mark of the Hollow Moon. Saga. This saga, driven by intense conflict and character contrast, offers several powerful storytelling lessons. Worth is internal, not categorical. Alora's entire journey proves that strength and value are not defined by a social label, alpha, beta, omega, or a physical status, mated, barren, strong shift. Her true power lay in her intellect, tenacity, and specialized observation skills, the runt's view. Don't let your character's assigned weaknesses be their only story. Solitude is the deepest vulnerability. Alpha Orion, the most physically powerful wolf, was saved because his fear of loneliness was his greatest weakness, which Alora's honesty could target. The most dominant characters often hide the deepest emotional needs. The best alliances are transactional. The initial forced proximity and transactional honesty, I need a shield, you need survival, created a foundation of trust and honesty that a typical romantic true-mate bond would lack. The relationship became real after they satisfied their contractual obligations. Fluff is replaced by sensory and political detail. To maintain high tension and massive word counts without slowing the plot, the narrative focused on sensory assault, the scent of cedar and steel, the weight of the alpha's body, and intricate political maneuvering, the unwavering blade right, contract renegotiations, rather than unnecessary internal monologue. A curse can be a feature, not a flaw. Alora's echo curse, the very thing that defined her humiliation, forced her to develop the subtle, specialized magical sensitivity needed to locate the keep and guide Orion through the traps. The flaw became the unique asset. Would you like to start planning a new story using one of these lessons as the central theme, perhaps focusing on a character whose assigned strength is actually their greatest weakness?